Hello, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be making a venison salami. Now this is quite a long video, so I've broken it down into chapters so you can skip to the bits that interest you the most. During the process of making the salami there is a period of drying and equalisation, and that can extend the time it takes to produce the salami, and I will explain a little bit more about that later in the video, and that's one of the chapters that you can actually skip to if that's something that interests you. Let me know your comments in the comments section. I've left all the details of how I made the salami and the recipe in the description. I'd be really interested to know what you thought, and I hope you enjoy the video. Let's get into it. Now, this venison salami is mixed with pork, and I'm using pork belly, and the ratios are roughly 60-40 in favour of venison. Now if we come down to the table, I've got my venison here, that's already diced, and I took that from a leg. I'll show you the video of me prepping this meat because I had to lean out the fat on the pork, and I've separated that here, and that's been frozen. Now for this venison salami I am using belly pork, and that's fine, but there is a question sometimes about the fat texture of pork belly, and if you can get back fat it has a much firmer structure, and some would argue is much better in salami. I tend to agree with that, but in this case I wanted to make this video a little bit more accessible for people who are trying this for the first time, and perhaps if you can't get back fat from your butcher, it's very easy to get some high fat belly pork strips and just spend a little bit of extra time taking the skin off them like I am here in this video, and then just taking your time to remove as much fat as possible to put it to one side. Now once all the fat's been removed from these, I'll cut it into small pieces, I'll put it into a bowl, and we'll be freezing this down so that we can introduce it into the mixture at a later stage. Right, I have here a beautiful haunch of venison, and this is from a Chinese water deer. First thing I need to do is to remove some of the tougher bits of this joint, and that's going to be like the sinew and any gristle that's going to be difficult to go through the mincer. I also want to try and remove as much of that silver skin as possible. Now the silver skin is that kind of membrane over the surface of the muscle, and it's got a sort of silver look to it, and you need to get the knife underneath this and remove as much of it as possible. Taking the joints of meat from the venison, you need to run the knife down the length of the bone and gently pare away the meat as best you can. Sometimes on this leg you can find where two muscles join and you can seam them apart with the knife, but the idea is to take your time, take as much of the meat away from the bone as you can, dice it into 1 to 2 inch dice, and don't worry too much about the size, just so long as it fits into your mincer for when we come to that particular stage in the salami making process. Once all the meat's diced and off the bone and in the bowl, we'll be using the bones at a later stage to create a stock. In this venison salami, it's going to be essentially a pepper and juniper salami. I've got two types of pepper here. I've got some cracked black pepper and some white pepper, 3 teaspoons, 2 teaspoons. I've got some Prague Powder number 2, 6.75 grams, and I've got 50 grams of salt. Now for the 2.7 kilos of meat and fat mixture that I've got here, that works out roughly 2% salt content, which is fine for salami. I've got 4 heaped tablespoons of juniper berries, and with anything like juniper berries that you know, they might have a surface coating or a yeast which you don't know. A protective measure that I've taken with this particular product is to steep them in boiling water for about half an hour, and that will kill any surface yeast on the outside, rendering them safe to put into your salami so that they're going to be okay. Now, some of those haven't ground through. I mean, most of them are ground, but there's the occasional one here that's whole, so we're not worried too much about that. It's always nice to get a little surprise in your salami, I think. This is going to be a fermented salami, so we're using a starter culture, and this is FLC starter culture. It's a Listeria protective starter culture, and I'll give you a list of all the ingredients in that later on in the video. To reconstitute that, I'm just going to put a little bit of mineral water with that, about 70 mils, and that will just get that going. So these starter cultures, they have with them a monosaccharide sugar, and that essentially that is a simple sugar. It's a sugar that is easy to ferment, and it can either be glucose or dextrose, anything like that. It's going to be absolutely fine. So all we need to do with that is just stir it up and let it go. You might ask why I'm using mineral water. Great question if you did ask that. Well, the reason I'm using mineral water is because if you use tap water, it has chlorine in it, and that will inhibit the growth of the starter culture. So always use mineral water or demineralized water if you're going to be making starter cultures ready for use in these salamis. So the first thing we need to do is to mince the frozen fat, and the reason I'm going to be mincing the frozen fat is because I'm going to, once I've got it back out of the mincer, I'm going to be putting it back into the freezer and introducing it into the mix later on in the process. The reason I'm doing that is so that I can have really nice defined pieces of fat in the finished salami. So first things first, let's get all this ingredients minced. So that's the fat all minced. We'll get this back in the freezer so we can reintroduce this into the mix at a later stage. So the next job is to mince the venison and the pork, and just to make it easy, I'm going to plonk all the venison in here. And I'm going to do exactly the same with the pork, and I'll feed them all through at the same time. That way we'll get a nice little mix. So this is including all the fat, I've got about 2.7 kilos. There we go, a nice little piece of meat out there. Right, let's get this on. We'll get our meat going down here. And I'm feeding in our venison and our pork. I think I've got a plunger somewhere. I'll go and get that in a minute. I don't need it just yet. This is a very efficient piece of kit, this mixer, or mincer I should say. It really does a nice job. Now, with belly pork, it's actually quite difficult to lean it out completely, so really the fat that I've got is just off the top surface of the pork itself. Anyway, shut up and get mincing. on, down you go, boy. Wow, I don't even need to use the plunger. That's as good as gold. Now, in the old days, what your granny would have done is put a load of bread down there to push all that meat through. But you know what? We're not going to do that. What we'll do is we'll empty the mincer. Do you know what? I didn't even tell you that I'm actually using an 8mm plate here. And that's quite a coarse plate. I've got two for this particular mincer. I have a 5mm plate and an 8mm plate. And the 8mm will give you a nice coarse ground salami. And that's what we want at the end of the day, isn't it? It's certainly what I want anyway. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the mincer apart. And I'm just going to harvest that last bit of meat in the end. Don't want to waste anything here. So that, believe it or not, all that can be harvested. It's time to introduce all our seasonings, and here they are on the table. So we've got our juniper, we've got our monosaccharide sugar and our starter culture. And in order for these to get going quite early on in the process, I like to get these in really, really quickly. I will add the salt later on in the process because the salt will slightly inhibit the bacterial growth. So I like to get that in and doing its thing, you know? So enough of that, all right? Serious work here. Okay, so monosaccharide sugar in. That's just a simple glucose sugar, easy fermented. There's our starter culture, completely in there with a little bit of mineral water, and that really was foaming up, so that's a good thing. So we'll take our salt off, we'll get our pepper in. And our juniper. And now this is where you get hands on and mix this all together. So now you've got to be really careful with pepper because it always makes me sneeze. Well, I say you don't have to be really careful with it. I do. Because it's one of those things that always gets me. So we want to mix this up really nicely, get all that ingredients melded together. That's it. We're not too worried about releasing the myosin in this mixture. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the starter cultures nowadays, they actually will help with the texture of the salami when they ferment and they create like a gel mixed with the fat and the proteins in the meat. And it does a pretty good job of holding the salami together. In the old days, you'd use the salt in the mixture. And if we put the salt in too early, what we would have a tendency to do also is to over extract that protein. So we're going to add the salt later on in the process. Okay, yeah, look at that. You can see whole juniper berries in there. That's going to be a real nice little surprise. I always find that in salami, you know, when you get a whole peppercorn or something like that, it really does kind of, I love it. I absolutely love it. All right, so that's all good stuff. Next thing I want to do is get this nitrite salt. This is a Prague Powder 2. It's got sodium nitrate, potassium nitrate and sodium nitrite in there. Nitrite gives it the protection. Nitrate will reduce and provide that long-term protection as it's drying. It will also help form that nice cured meat red colour. by reducing and bonding with the myoglobin, and that gives a nice stable red colour, that typical sort of cured meat look that we're all used to. Okay, so that's the curing salt in, and I'm going to start adding the salt. I'll do this little by little. I say that and I'll just chunked a whole load in there. That's good. That's okay. We got time. Turn this over. Now we're going to be putting this through a sausage stuffer to get this into the casings, and it'll be mixed before all that happens. Remember, we've still got that frozen fat to put in there, and you know, the only reason we're... Oh, I've got a split glove there. Oh well, I'm glad I washed my hands beforehand. That's something you always have to be a little bit careful of when doing salamis. Sometimes I double glove, sometimes I don't. I should have double gloved, but there you go. Let me just go and replace that glove. So I always tend to go for these blue sort of nitrile gloves. These ones, they're slightly different. They still offer you protection, but they tend to pull off. Do you see what I mean? They're not brilliant. Now I know some people will wash their hands and they'll just do this with a bare hand. And you know what, that's fine. If you're doing it for yourself, that's fine. Let's just get as much meat off there as possible. And I think I'm going to ditch that. Now this is our frozen fat, and we're going to add this into the mixture, and we're going to get this mixed in. Escaping fat nodules. That's looking really good, and it will hold its shape, and that's what you want. If you don't freeze the fat, there's a tendency that you'll get a phenomenon known as fat smear. So when you cut through the salami, the fat will smear and it won't hold its shape. And that can also be a result of using the wrong type of fat as well. So if you use soft fat, like the fat that you get on the inside of the pig, it can be a bit of a problem. So if you use back fat or the hard belly fat on the outside, that tends to work better. There we go. Just folding this in, that's looking really nice. And we're beginning to get that stickiness coming, which is a good sign that this is going to hold together. So once we get this stuffed into the casings, we'll hang these up to ferment. I might actually pop them in the smoker as well, just so we can smoke them for 24 hours. And they'll ferment really nicely as they do that. So that's looking pretty good. Right. Okay, so before we stuff this, I'm going to check the pH level, the acidity of this meat. Now, if you remember, low numbers below 7 are acidic, numbers above 7 are alkaline. And we're looking for a measurement of below 7, typically around about 6, but we'll see what the meat tells us. So that's quite acidic already. Let's get it in there. So ideally I'm looking for a pH drop at the end of fermentation to be around about 4.2, 4.5. But typically for salami, anything below 5.2 is okay. So we've got 4.82, so it's quite acidic already. I'll put the details of this meter in the description to the video, and there's a video I'm going to be putting out about how to calibrate this and get it ready so that you can use it, and some of the attachments that come with this, which are quite useful. So okay, it's changing slightly, so it's 4.9 and rising slightly. So we'll call it 5, and we'll leave it back in the water, and we'll put that to one side. Now once it's in the casing, you may be asking, well, how can you tell if there's a pH drop? Well, we will be testing the salami by piercing it with this, and this attaches onto the end of that pH meter, and it's basically a meat blade, and it cuts the meat. As you press it into the salami, it cuts the meat, and it allows you to take a pH meeting without having to harvest some of the meat separately from the salami. So you can use all of that in your salami, and we'll just test the end of the salami with this. Right. As you can see, I've ditched the gloves. It's a lot of aggro. Let me take you through the casings. We're using these 55mm paper casings. They've got a hook and loop at the end, so they're crimped and looped at the end, and they're quite long. They're about 2 foot long, about 600mm long, and they've got a finished diameter around about, I think it's around about 55mm, which is just over 2 inches. And we're going to slide these on and get some meat into them. I'm using my 3 litre sausage stuffer, and I'm using the largest nozzle with that as well. So what I need to do is I need to get this meat into the sausage stuffer, and I'm just going to push it in there. And when you press it in, I do it in small amounts, and then I use the back of my fingers just to press it nice and flat. And that means that we get all the air out of it, because we don't want to be putting air in our salami. That's a major faux pas, and we don't want that. So we'll take small bites, pressing it down, getting all that air out as we go. We should be able to get all this in one go. Well, we'll see how we get on. Adding that extra water when we put the starter culture in does slacken the mixture a little bit. It makes it a little bit easier to get it all in there, and that helps in the whole scheme of things. Right, so we're getting quite close now. I think we are going to get all of that in, you know. That's a good thing. Last knock-ins. We don't want to waste any of this. It's the old phrase, it's bought and paid for, so we're going to pop it in, missus. Right, so let's get that last little bit in there. Oh, there we go. Okay, so that's it. I'll just give my hands a quick turn over. So you can see that's all in there now. One of the things I find with sausage making is that it is really, really difficult to do it with gloves on, so I just don't. Make sure your hands are nice and clean, and we'll load our sausage stuffer. I'll get our handle in here. Okay, we are ready to stuff the sausages, and that's the next thing we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to be tying off this salami once it's in the casing with these strings, and it's always good to have these handy. And let's get our first casing, which has been soaking. We'll get it loaded in onto our nice big chunky old mandrel. Oh, that's good. There we go. Now I'm going to go on I've got a high ratio gear on this, and I think what I might need to do is just angle this to the edge like that. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to be pushing air out of this initially, obviously, because we've got our meat pushing up through, and there you go, there we see it. And now what you want to do is just put a little bit of resistance here as you fill this casing up, and you will notice that there's quite a bit of tension in that. Okay, now's not the time for innuendo or jokes, all right? Just saying, just putting it out there. Right. This is serious stuff, okay? Serious. Okay, so we're making it as nicely tightly packed as possible. Normally you can hear if air's coming out because you'll get a sort of sound. I'm not hearing that, and that's a good sign. We are going to be pricking the casings of these using my murder death tool. If you haven't got one of those, you can use a pin, that's fine. So, and you can see, you can always tell if you're doing it tight enough because this casing will look nice and shiny. That's looking really good. Now, if you are concerned about how big this salami is going to be, you can get some scales and zero them. And just very quickly detach it and plonk it down. So that's 700 grams. So that, is it? Yeah, 730 grams. So we could probably put a little bit more in that, just a fraction. There you go. I'm not going to go any more than that. So I reckon I'll make 4 of these out of this particular batch of meat. So now I've got all the meat in there that I want to try and compress it. And the way I do that is by twisting it. You can see if you leave the tension off this will go a little bit slack and you'll get creases in it. We don't want that. Remember, as this meat dries and ferments, it will shrink. So the tighter you can get it at this stage, the better. No one wants a slack salami. Right? And I'm just gradually doing this as slowly as I can, just easing the meat down the end and just increasing that tension very slightly, twisting that as we go. That's looking really nice and shiny. There we go. I think I'm ready for some string. And no fancy knots here, just get a knot on there that works, pull it tight whilst you're holding the tension, and you're good to go. So there we are. I will give that another go. I'll go round a couple of times. Really nice and tight. There we go. And we'll try and get any meat that's left in there out and back onto that. There we go, that's cool. With our scissors, always leave about 1/2 inch on the end. You don't want the knot slipping off inadvertently. We'll also just snip that short like that. And there is our salami. Now, what we'll do here, I'll run all the rest through in a minute, is you just want to pierce this just to let some air out. If there is any air, also helps a little bit with the drying. And that's absolutely spot on. And there we go, and we're back to the beginning again. That's it. And there we have it. Venison and pork salami with juniper and pepper. And we're going to allow these to ferment now, and they have to be fermented at room temperature. They can go a little bit hotter, so up to about 27 degrees Celsius. But I'm going to pop these in the cold smoker outside where it's a little cooler. However, I'm going to be smoking them, so there's going to be a little bit of heat generated through the smoker, and that will mean that they will do their fermentation. It'll take about 36 hours for that, and we'll come back and visit these when they go back into the smoker. Right, let me get on with the others. Well, I'm down to the very last salami, and whenever you get down to this stage, you've got a load of meat in the tube, which you have to get out. There's also some remnants in the sausage stuffer, which you can harvest, place into the tube, and I push this down with my finger until I can get a large piece of kitchen towel in there to push the rest of the meat through. Right, these are the finished salami. They're all pierced, all the air has been taken out of them, and they have a nice springy tension. These are ready to go into the smoker, so that's the next process. I'm going to be smoking these salami in my original cold smoker. If you want to build one yourself, you can find plans on my website coldsmoking.co.uk. I'm putting them in the very top of the smoker so that they get the best of the smoke. I'm using a mixture of oak and beech to smoke these, and I'm going to be cold smoking, which means the temperature inside is not going to exceed 30 degrees Celsius. And on the day that I smoked them, the temperature was around about 15 to 16 degrees. Additional temperature generated by the smoke would cause a temperature to be around about 20 degrees Celsius. And as they're cold smoking, they are also fermenting at the same time. And we'll leave them in here for around about 24 hours. This particular smoke generator will smoke for 18 hours, so I'll probably need to recharge it. So these salami came out the smoker yesterday, and just look at the colour of them. So they've fermented, and that colour change is so dramatic, and it's absolutely due to the fermentation process. Now, to carry on drying these, I'm going to dry them in dry aging bags. Now, there's videos on my channel about the dry aging bags. If you want to go and have a look at those, I'll put a link in the description. They're very clever bags. The best way I can describe them is they are the food equivalent of Gore-Tex, and it will allow these salami to dry in those bags on a rack in any normal fridge, and they work fantastically. But anyway, if you want to see that video, go and have a look at the channel. All the details are in the description. As you look at the salami, you can see they've got a plastic coating. Now that is over the existing casing of the salami. So that plastic casing, first of all, is a dry aging bag. Now these are those special bags I've already talked about. The meat net on the outside, this is like an elasticated roasting net that you sometimes see on cooking joints. This is there to hold the dry aging bag in close proximity to the salami so that you get that really effective drying. And over the top of that, I've added a string trussing. This is standard butcher string. I've used half hitches and pulled it really tight to keep that nice and tight. And this is there simply to compress the salami, because as I'm sure you're all aware, as meat dries it shrinks and we don't want any voids inside this salami. So in order that we don't get those, I compress it as tight as I can, and this is the finished effect. Now these are ready to go into the fridge where they will air dry for a specific period of time, and that is really governed by the amount of loss of weight that we want to achieve, and in this case it's going to be around about 25%. So this salami was in the fridge for around about 10 days, and by that time it had reached its target weight. Now that's quite a quick drying time if you want me to be absolutely honest with you, and normally I would expect it to have taken a lot longer than that, but it didn't. It happened very quickly. So what I wanted to try and do was to arrest that drying process so we didn't end up with a case hardened salami. And the way that I did that was I placed the whole package of the dry aging bag, the meat net and the trussing straight into an ordinary vacuum bag. And what that would do was prevent any more moisture leaving that salami. And I left it in the fridge to equalise for a further 10 weeks. Now these things don't happen overnight. It takes that length of time for the inner wetter bits of the salami to actually sort of move through to the outer part, which is now dry, and sort of rehydrate that. And so you get a nice even look throughout the whole of the salami. That's very important. It takes a bit of time. These things don't happen overnight, but now we're ready to open this up and check the salami. So let's do that. Let's take this one out the middle here. And I'll just give that a little wipe down because that's got some moisture on the outside. There we go, that's looking really nice actually. The smell, oh, I can't tell you, it's delicious. I just did tell you. So, let us take off. There we go. Let's see if we can peel this off. We'll take the trussing off completely, I think. Well, only down a little way. I'm not going to take all of this out. There we go. That'll do. There we are, and you can see the dry aging bag here has done its thing. So let's just chop this section out here. There we go. Look at that. So this is our juniper and pepper salami, and you can see there's no smearing. You've got a nice fat definition here, and there's no dry ring around the outside. We've got an even colour throughout, which is what we're aiming for. Right, so that's the aesthetics. Let's, oh, and the smell, I can taste that smoke. So let us just give this a little bit of a slice. This has still got a casing on it, so I will take that casing off. There we go. Good texture. Oh my goodness me. Oh my goodness me. That's got a really, really nice tang to it. Oh. You can taste the juniper, and the venison's got that beautiful kind of irony flavour. That's lovely. This is Chinese water deer. Oh, that is beautiful. You can just about see the pepper in there. A nice big lump of juniper right there. Lovely. Mmm. Take the casings off this. Oh my goodness me. That, my friends, is a complete success. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. I had a lot of fun making that salami. It was one of those projects that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and it's not often that I get a piece of venison of such high quality. Well look, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want to see any more content on the channel in a similar vein, please leave me some comments. And in the meantime, folks, take care of yourself. I'll see you on the next video. Cheerio, bye bye.